Welcome to the Curious Minds podcast. This is episode 1, and the title of this episode is Let's Start with the Second. And by second, I'm talking about the Second Amendment. Guns and gun ownership and gun violence are huge topics in the United States, especially right now, but all over the world there's violence. And we want to talk about what is it about guns? For everything from top to bottom, why is it that we are a gun-loving culture in the United States? What is it that we can do to help prevent? What is it we can do to help educate? So today we're going to start off with our very first topic. And keep in mind that every topic we talk about on the Curious Minds podcast is going to be something different. We just decided to start with this. Across from me is Arthur Thomm. He is the Director of Legislative Affairs and co-founder and former vice president and the first lobbyist for the West Virginia Citizens Defense League. And I'll let him explain a little bit more about what these groups do. But Art works for the NRA, for the National Rifle Association. He's authored or co-authored every firearms-related legislation passed in West Virginia since 2009, including statewide preemption, constitutional carry, campus carry, and the removal of the state sales tax on firearms and ammunition. And we'll let him talk more about some of those bills as part of today's podcast. He has now represented the NRA in 12 states and the passage of constitutional carry in 6 states. We'll talk a little bit about what constitutional carry means for those of you watching that aren't sure. We recognize that this is a topic that people feel very strongly about, and our goal today is not necessarily to push one side of the argument, although it might seem like it, having a representative from the NRA, but more just to educate people. I always notice when I listen to discussions that you hear, Art, welcome, first of all.
Thank you.
I always hear that, when you hear people talk about this very often in the major news networks, there's a lot of misinformation. So the main reason I wanted to invite you in is just to get some real facts. And obviously you have a point of view, and I do too personally, which I'll try not to include today. But the idea is that we hear a lot of one-sided arguments, and I think it's important to answer some questions and some fallacies that we hear in the news all the time. And I just thought this might be a good hot topic to start with that people have an interest in and are very passionate about. So let me start with this. What is it that you do exactly?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, I'm a lobbyist. Director of Legislative Affairs is the fancy term, but a lobbyist for the NRA. And I always say it's the Constitution's role to protect our freedoms. It's my job to protect the Second Amendment, and within that Constitution. And one of the things that a lot of people don't think about is what all goes into that. As a lobbyist, you hear the crazy stories about the backroom deals and closed door meetings and all that other stuff. And look, some of that's true, some of it's not. It's blown way out of proportion. But essentially, I look at legislation either to promote or to try to kill, and I try to educate legislators on a state and local level to help ensure that they look out for the Second Amendment and the members of the National Rifle Association.
So some people would make the argument, okay, in simple terms, you're paid to try to get legislators to pass bills that are pro-gun or pro-gun rights. Fair for them to say that, except it's also true what you're really just trying to do is pass legislation that represents our Constitution and also educate, because lawmakers can't be educated on every subject they vote on. So part of your job, I imagine, is to teach legislators who aren't familiar with firearms about rules and types and legislation that exists in other areas of the country so that they have an informed decision, so that they can they know what's going on in other places. They know what the public is thinking. They know what members of the NRA are thinking. They know, fair that they, that when you say backroom deals are like, oh, that's just, because one of the big arguments I hear against the NRA is, oh, well, when you have that many members and you're pumping that much money into campaigns and all that, we all know that politics can be a dirty business. But the bottom line is, if you look at your job more as is it okay to say or fair to say that you look at your job more as I need to educate these people about what the Constitution says and what the Constitution believes based on rulings, based on court hearings, based on all, so that they can make informed decisions about voting on new legislation or getting rid of old legislation that you feel like violates our individual constitutional rights.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of the things, when you talk about, the NRA and being powerful and the money that gets dumped into it, look, the money's a big deal, right? And there is some money, that some campaign contributions that every organization, certainly provides to legislators, to PACs, to campaigns, things of that nature. But I'll tell you, in the grand scheme of things, the NRA is not all that large. One of the things, if there is, that makes us so powerful, it's our membership, and it's the folks in this country that believe deeply in our Second Amendment rights and the right to protect yourself, your family, and others that may be around you. That's a huge deal. And when we look at other countries that have taken that away, or where I am on a state and local level, we look at people across just across the state lines over in the People's Republic of Maryland, or we look at Virginia and the way that they're turning, and here in West Virginia specifically, the people get really nervous very fast about the turn of events, and they understand how that can end up coming here as well. And it's my job to try to educate, as you mentioned, the legislators, to let them know, hey, look, this is why this is a problem.
Right.
This is how your districts believe. And one of the things that I tell all of them is, look, I'm always going to tell you the truth. You and your constituents both, and I hold myself strongly to that.
Yeah.
And they know at the end of the day, when it comes to re-election time, look, especially in the state of West Virginia, the gun vote comes out to vote. Everybody's going to be out there.
And it's true, I think, also, and a reasonable expectation that people have is that gun rights are a bigger deal in more conservative political areas. I don't know if that means that you might know more than I do on this. I don't know if that means that more democratic areas don't believe in the same rights, but along with their vote along party lines or for Democratic candidates, generally speaking, Democratic candidates in state, local, or federal government positions have not supported the Second Amendment in the way that Republican candidates have. So historically, when people think of Second Amendment supporters, they're thinking the country folk, as I think one of the political candidates said, clinging to their Bibles and their guns. And so, it is, and West Virginia definitely is a pretty strongly, although not always, but right now maybe a pretty strongly conservative state in at least the last few presidential elections. And there are a lot of people here who, you're right, that could be swayed strongly by the threat of a loss of a freedom like the Second Amendment. So let me ask about like some of the legislation. Can you talk a little bit about, in the states, just generically, what kinds of legislation you've worked on? Because I read it, but there's a lot of fancy speak. What does it mean in plain language?
Good question. So some of the big pushes lately have been, as you mentioned, constitutional carry, which is a generic term for, it's been called constitutional carry. It's called permitless carry. Basically, it's the carrying of a concealed firearm without a permit. And a lot of people that are on the other side, the opposite side of us, say, well, that's very dangerous. These people are going to be out there without background checks, without training, things of these nature. And the facts state that, and even though it's kind of detrimental to us, the NRA is the largest and oldest training organization in the world, that when it comes to accidental, incidental, or intentional shootings, training really has no benefit nor detriment. So in states where we've passed constitutional carry, or where constitutional carry has been passed, rather, we don't see instances jump up. We don't see the increase in crime. We don't see a decrease in officer safety. It's kind of like a just status quo, really.
I've always heard the expression an armed state is a polite state, or an armed. And when you go out there and you think about road rage, for example, if I think I've always felt like if I think the other person in the other car could have a loaded weapon that they're carrying, I'm probably less likely to provoke them than I would. In other words, I feel like the idea, me personally, the idea that, and not because I'm worried about them being crazy, because I don't want to portray it as, somebody who carries a firearm with them is more likely to lose their temper and use it. But in states where we've seen legislation passed, and that's an interesting point you made, which I didn't think about, that the NRA would actually lose money because the NRA is paid to train people to get permits to carry in a lot of states, or did. So the NRA arguing for permitless carry is truly, people might object to this word, but is a selfless act, because you guys, the NRA or the people, make money based on teaching classes to get permits. And if we have permitless carry, that's taking money out of the NRA in effect, but they're arguing the point over the money.
That's right. And Dirk, I've been an instructor for a very, very, very long time. And, people say, and we had instructors actually when we passed this, even here in the state of West Virginia back in 2016, come out and say, well, we don't like it because essentially it's going to take away from our money. And look, the Constitution doesn't give us a right unless, it's going to pay you. So
right.
That's not an argument for me.
That's interesting.
Whatsoever.
So they even had instructors within the state saying, I don't know, obvious gun supporters.
Absolutely.
Arguing against a gun rights bill because they were worried about it taking money out of their pocket.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And look, just because, you may believe that you're going to, financially be harmed by this, that's not a reason for to
deny a right.
Right, absolutely, correct.
Gotcha.
But it's one of those things where what we've seen here in the state of West Virginia, just like most other states, Alaska exempted, but then again they're landlocked by another country, is the instance of permits have increased actually in permitless carry states or constitutional carry states since being passed.
Why did they think that is?
Well, we're not exactly sure, but if you get more comfortable with carrying a firearm within your own state, and a place like here in the Eastern Panhandle of West Virginia, you're so close to Maryland, you're so close to Virginia, Pennsylvania, that it's not going to take you, but maybe a 20-minute drive, and you can be in 3 other states, and neither of those are permitless carry states. So you're going to have a permit, a West Virginia issued permit, in order to be able to have reciprocity and carry in those states.
And does a permit in one state automatically allow you to carry in any other state?
No. So there's reciprocal agreements that the Attorney General from whichever state will enter into with other states. Here in the state of West Virginia, we have 38 other states that hold reciprocity. Maryland is not one of them. They don't recognize any other outside state. You can obtain a non-resident permit, and thankfully, just in the last I guess probably last year, I was able to grab one myself. So,
well, in doing a little bit of research, there was a big Supreme Court case that made it all the way to the Supreme Court in New York State, because it was and you help me educate on this or make sure I'm right on this. There was a difference between may issue and shall issue, which meant when you applied, some states were or will issue, I guess, where all you had to do was apply and meet the requirements and not have, you pass your background check and you were given a permit if you applied and had all of the training required. But in other states, they'd say, yeah, we might, but you have to have all of these special reasons why. And I think Maryland is one of those, that used to be one of those. And then there was a big case in New York where a person sued on behalf of themselves with the NRA support of, hey, it doesn't say in the Constitution the right to bear arms except when I'm making a big bank drop, or only when I'm carrying a suitcase full of diamonds.
Right.
Like, I should have the right just because I'm me and I'm a person. And that, forgive me if I'm wrong, but that ended up winning enough that the governor of Maryland, Governor Hogan, before he went out of office, said in Maryland, based on this legislation and the Supreme Court's decision in New York, we now believe that our requirement to have these special considerations is unconstitutional. So now Maryland became will issue or shall issue, meaning that if you apply and you pass their requirements, that they will issue you one. So West Virginia has 38, but if you were to drive to Maryland without having, assuming you didn't have a Maryland permit, if you were to drive across the river into Maryland, you would then be a felon.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep. And the The Maryland, there was a pretty good synopsis of Maryland. They are now a shall issue state. The Bruin decision, which was the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association, which is the NRA. That's a.
Oh, okay.
If you were to go back and look at it, we were formed the exact same time. It's just the state level group of the NRA.
Okay.
Same address, all the other stuff, right? So, but a lot of people will see that, especially with some of the even friends, on our own side that are now naysayers of our organization. They'll say, "Oh, the NRA is just jumping on the backs of somebody local." And the way it works is there has to be somebody local.
Yeah, you have to have. I know this from other court stuff that you have to have standing.
Right.
You have to have been damaged by a law in order to sue or to file a lawsuit. So I can't just say, I don't like a law that says I didn't chew gum, that you can't chew gum in the state of West Virginia. I have to actually be ticketed or arrested before I have standing to file a lawsuit.
Right. So, and just to put, an instance like here in West Virginia, where there is a current case that deals with, lead ammunition and how you can hunt, where you can hunt, how you can hunt. And we had to seek out, because we know that the way that the ruling is wrong. We know that the ban on the ammunition is wrong, but we can't sue. The NRA can't sue, so we had to find somebody in the state of West Virginia, which we were able to do, and then we say, okay, you are now the plaintiff, and we're your money.
Gotcha.
We're going to fund this lawsuit.
Because this was an individual who has standing because he or she has been harmed by this law.
That's
or
absolutely
whose
right.
rights have been taken, according to this side of the argument, from you.
That's right.
So, and then the judge will ultimately, but to get to the Supreme Court takes a long time, right? So it would go through the state, all the appellate courts, and then it would end up in the Supreme Court if it gets that far.
Yes, absolutely, and it can, although it can take a lot faster than that. So if you or I or any other private individual were to appeal a case, through the different appellate courts, the Supreme Court can take up the case.
Right,
they don't have to.
They're not
take
obligated.
Right. Yeah. So the difference is and if we rewind back to the time of Washington D.C. and I don't know if you recall this. This is back years ago now.
Is this the Heller case?
No, this was after Heller.
Okay.
And a similar issue where they were not issuing permits, and they said, well, it was challenged, and it was ruled, much more local that they couldn't do that, and because it's the District of Columbia, not necessarily a state, it had to go to everybody.
Gotcha.
All of us could get non-resident permits for the District of Columbia because technically it's all of our city, right? It's our nation's capital.
The people's.
So when they lost that suit, if they were to have appealed it, it would go straight to the Supreme Court, just like any other state. If they were to
Because there's no other path.
right, yeah,
Right.
It goes straight there.
Gotcha.
Well, at that time, the attorneys general from Maryland and Illinois and New York and California, the 7 states that were still sitting in May issue, told DC, don't do that, don't appeal,
Because if they lost,
they knew what was coming. They knew this Bruin decision that you're talking about. They knew this decision was coming. They knew it was inevitable, and we could have had this years and years ago. But unfortunately, the anti-gun folks in these other states convinced DC. I'm sure it wasn't difficult to not appeal that decision, so that they did not crumble the entire building, which is what happened. Now years later, through the Bruin decision, when they said when the Supreme Court came out and said, look, and the Supreme Court in this circumstance took our case. It wasn't the New York appellate, appealing the case. So they didn't have to take it, but they did take it, and they said that certainly this May issue scheme was totally unconstitutional. That you should not have to prove why you need to carry. Personal defense is an absolutely good argument. I mean, the anti-gun folks, it kind of amusing that they'll say on one hand that crime is rampant and you can't go anywhere without being shot, and then they tell us you got to prove to me why you need to carry a gun to protect yourself.
I listened to a bunch of different podcasts, and one of them is I won't mention the name of the podcast right away, but they are generally speaking not completely anti-gun, but they are pro-restrictions. And so, but then on another, and every time, and we're going to get to this later, every time there's a quote-unquote mass shooting, every time there's a fatalities, they up in arms, we've got to do something, we've got to do something. The funny part is a lot of times, and we'll get to this later, but I don't know nobody's clear on the something. We got to do something, and we're going to talk about what some things might be here in a few minutes. How did you end up here, like in your career path? I know you've done other things, but how did you get to this, and why is this important to you?
Sure. So, I was in staffing and HR for many, many years. And I thought that was going to be my life, right? I was going to run a staffing company until I retired or maybe, handed, over to my kids. I don't know what I was going to do. I was just going to be a 9-to-5 office guy, I guess. But back in 2008-9 era, I found a few other folks who had just started moving the organization called the West Virginia Citizens Defense League. And they needed some help locally, so we all met. I joined up with them, and through there, we realized that we had a significant issue here in the state of West Virginia with our preemption law. The preemption law, for anybody that doesn't understand it, is right now the state or a municipality or county cannot preempt state law. So if state law is it cannot be more strict than what state law is. And we had that happening in several cities across the state.
Isn't that kind of, it's kind of like who gets the final say, right?
That's right.
And in any law, the federal government law is supposed to trump state or city law. So what was happening in West Virginia was the state would say it's okay for you to carry a gun, let's say, in a certain place, or a firearm in a certain place. But if you went into the city of, say, Charleston, the capital of West Virginia, they had laws that specified that you were not allowed to carry within city limits, for example, or on city property.
Right.
And so you literally, if you were walking down a street, you one piece of property you might be legal on, but if the city owned it, you weren't legal. And there's no real way to know that. It was really a sort of a pitfall.
Yeah, and that was that exact scenario was one of the problems across the state. It was specific to city-owned property, and people would say, that sounds reasonable, right? You shouldn't be able to carry into the courthouse. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, this building was acquired by the municipality because of back taxes. So now they own it, and there may be a restaurant in there that in every other part of the state is lawful to carry a firearm in for personal protection. But if you walk into that one,
because they are leasing the property from the city.
That's right. And now,
and how are you to know that?
That you can't, you can't, right? And the law enforcement at the time, in that specific situation, used the old absence of the or ignorance of the law
Right.
is no excuse. And it's like, look, I'm not talking about that I was going 30 instead of 20 in this zone.
Right. You're talking about becoming a felon.
Right. Yeah. This is a hugely different scenario.
Right. You're not going to get a warning ticket and sent on your way. You're going to get handcuffs, tens of thousands of dollars in lawyers' fees, and a criminal record for the rest of your life.
Right.
Just for walking into a restaurant when you thought you were completely a law-abiding citizen.
Yeah. Literally in Martinsburg, on one side of the street, as you were pointing out, there was a restaurant back then called the Blue and White Grill. It's since closed, unfortunately. It was a great place. You were 100% legal to go in there. If you walked directly across the street to Habanero Mexican Grill, also a great restaurant, you would...
We'll do a food segment on another podcast.
That's right. I could go on for days for that place. But you were now illegal. And the owner of that place couldn't have been happier when they were taken out of this equation and just able to just...
It's got to be uncomfortable for a business owner, too, especially if I guess regardless of whether they are a gun rights advocate or not, for them to have to know that they are a boiling point of this problem. They don't want to mess with that. They just want to serve food.
That's right.
And they didn't know when they rented the place, hey, if you rent this place, we're going to have cops watching guys coming in and out.
Absolutely not.
So they don't want all that headache.
Yep. So either way, we got that. We were able to get working on that. We had lawsuits across the state against these municipalities, and then through talking with legislators, we figured out, man, we can handle this legislatively, and from there, the WVCDL's push for moving and changing laws legislatively was born. And Keith Morgan and myself kind of took the group and ran with it, and through help of some really great boards, members of the board of directors and our members were incredible. We had some very, very monumental things happen.
So it started here in the West Virginia CDL, the Citizens Defense League, you mentioned the name earlier, was sort of a local ground, what do they call it, grassroots organization within the state to begin that work of at least getting West Virginia's house in order, so to speak, about consistency of gun laws and respecting the Second Amendment and that kind of thing. And from that, you met people, I assume, made contacts in Washington or wherever you guys as a state with the governor, whoever was governor at the time, the senators, state senators, and then went on to, hey, I like what I'm doing here. I like making progress. And then that translated to the NRA.
Yeah, it did. Yeah. And through passive preemption, leading the lobby for that, and then authoring or co-authoring the constitutional carry law that we passed here, and leading the efforts lobbying efforts to get that passed, certainly caught the attention of nationally in the NRA, and they offered me the opportunity to take my show on the road. That's
great. Yeah, and now you have how many states that you work in or with?
Well, right now I'm back down to 4,
okay.
But I was just 5. But we kind of have I'm back up to 5 again. I forgot to just pick Michigan back up. So but I've always been kind of like our utility shortstop. When something's going on, they'll toss me in to make sure that we focus our efforts specifically in that area.
Is it not to diminish what you do? Is it somewhat of a copy paste? Well, because once you accomplish, we'll move a little bit into some of the constitutional carry, which basically says if you are legal to own a firearm, you are legal to carry that firearm. Not a long gun, right? We're talking about pistols, handguns. In a
specific situation, yes.
Okay. So if I own a handgun and I am legal to own it, then I'm also legal to carry it according to the Constitution, is the argument for constitutional carry.
Correct.
So when you pass that in one state, does that look very similar from state to state?
We try to make it that way. There's going to be different nuances from different states, and look, every state's legislature wants to put their mark on their legislation, and I can appreciate that.
To make it unique, or to restrict it in certain ways that can make their constituents happy, or when you say put their mark on it?
Just, make it a little bit different or specified to each state, really. We go in with, we offer model language, say this is our model language across the country, and different things will happen. Like, for instance, Alabama, which was intensely difficult, and you wouldn't think in Alabama to pass a bill like constitutional carry that it would be, but it took me near 7 years to pass that bill there. And previous to that passage, had to come to get around the law enforcement's concerns. It came down to money, but
okay,
they gave some other concerns prior to that it was my job to try to navigate, and through that came a lifetime permit bill that was passed before that, which came with that came a database of prohibited persons, not law-abiding people. So if you're law-abiding, you're fine. The only way you can get put onto this database is if you've went through a court of law and a judge has ruled you guilty of a crime that would then make you a prohibited person either by federal or state law in Alabama. And I was okay with that, because if you're not supposed to have a firearm, you're not supposed to have it, right?
Right. Isn't that the case anyway, technically? Like even in West Virginia, I believe, when I was doing some research for this, like when you go to purchase one, and I'd love to talk about this too, because I know there's a lot of misinformation out there. When you go to purchase a firearm, no matter who you are, you fill out a form, you fill out a questionnaire, and it asks you questions like, have you ever been convicted of a felony? Have you had a judgment entered against you for domestic violence? And it asks you all these. Now, the argument that Second Amendment people will say is there are people that lie on this form and then it never gets checked, and that's how you end up with people that, the other people would say, like, well, what stops people from lying on this form? So, but technically, people that are guilty of a felony aren't supposed to own a firearm, and they should get rejected when they go to purchase it, which means they don't have one to carry, in theory. Now, sure, they can go buy one on the in a back road deal or something from somebody illegally and carry, but then they're already breaking the law. So,
That's right.
So the need for preemption or the need for the list was necessary or not really?
Not really, but that's
because those people would already be forbidden.
Yeah, that's right.
But they needed that to make them feel comfortable enough to say to the constituents, well, look, we passed this bill that says all these people can't have it, so we're safe.
That's right. That's right. And to get over what they thought or considered were the legitimate concerns of their law enforcement officers. I knew that wasn't the case, and I had said all along that once we got through that, it was going to pin them down to money, because the sheriff's departments there, just like here, get a portion of the permit fees that gets to their slush fund. And the sheriffs are able to do almost what they will with that
So
money.
if there's 100,000 people paying $100 for their permit, you've lost a healthy share of your budget coming in. So we're going to oppose that because that hurts us financially.
Right. And it's not even their budget. It's, and the county commissions are responsible for funding the sheriff's departments. And this isn't like, and you'll say, oh, no, I can't. We hear it all the time. Now I can't put bulletproof vests on my officers. I can't buy another cruiser. I can't fund another
because you've
officer.
taken away the permit money.
Right. And that's not true. The county commissions are who fund that money. This is specific to their slush fund. Hey, and absolutely 100% here in the state of West Virginia, in the state of Alabama as well, we had sheriffs that were getting pilot's license lessons. With the slush fund money.
I got you.
That's right. Yeah, they were using it for whatever the world they wanted to.
Okay.
And your money should not go to that kind of nonsense, in order to carry your firearm discreetly or however you wish, right? But so either way, I knew there, if we got that through, it was going to be down the money. And if you put me against someone in the general public, and your argument is
rights versus money.
Yeah, pay me.
Right.
I got you.
Yeah.
And I knew I had you, so that's why, we went that route.
Well, considering that the general approval rate of most government is in the teens or lower, right, that people don't typically trust. So, they're, hey, this guy's making a lot of sense. It's all about, we know it's all about the money, right? Let's talk about the terms open carry versus concealed carry versus permitless carry. Or versus constitutional carry. Like, for example, open carry, let's start with open and concealed. Can you give me the difference between open and concealed carry and when they're important?
Yeah, sure. So openly carrying a firearm is where it can be readily visible on your person. If it's a rifle, it may be slung across your shoulder or your back. On a handgun, it could be, holstered to your side, to your back, duct tape to your forehead. I don't know. However you choose to.
Probably not a best idea, best practice.
I wouldn't go with it. Yeah.
But it basically means it's there if you're walking in. And here in West Virginia, open carry, and many states, I think most people would be surprised to find out that most or many states in the United States are open carry states.
All but 4. All but 4.
Mm-hmm. Do you happen to know which 4?
Yeah, it's because Florida is big on trying to get that passed. So Florida is one of them.
Really?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you wouldn't think, right?
No.
Yeah. So Florida's one, and then New York, and I think it's New York isn't outside of the city. California, and I'm drawing a blank.
That's okay.
On the other, but
even Maryland is an open carry state. You can open carry if you're a legal resident and a legal firearm owner in Maryland, correct?
If you have a permit, you have to have a permit in Maryland. But there is options or an opportunity to be able to openly carry a firearm.
In West Virginia, I know when we moved here, I went to Sheetz to get gas and walked in to pay when I first moved over here. And you see an older gentleman there with a mustache, wearing a 6-shooter on his hip and eating a hot dog in the middle of the Sheetz. I don't think most people realize that's legal. I think most people look at that and go, why is that guy I was sitting outside of Walmart one day waiting for my wife to come out, and I've see this young guy and his girlfriend, each with a big, shiny, they look like they were showing it off a little, but a big shiny gun on their hip walking into a Walmart. That's not unusual in this state.
Not in this state, no. And West Virginia is, had open carry laws. You've been able to openly carry a firearm in the state of West Virginia longer than we've been a state. So, because
it's a long held.
Yeah. Virginia's had it. So, we had it when we were Virginia. So,
and how does that compare to concealed carry?
So, concealed carry is if you cover the firearm, you put a jacket over it, put a shirt over it, stick it in your pocket, any of that type of thing, stick it in your purse, whatever that may be. One of the things that is a misconception is vehicle carry and concealed carry. If it's on your person and you're openly carrying, and again with constitutional carry, this isn't a problem anymore. But if you're openly carrying a firearm and you get into a vehicle, you're still openly carrying a firearm. The vehicle itself cannot conceal the firearm.
Okay.
And that's legal in the state of West Virginia.
So, for instance, you have a firearm on your right hip in a holster. You step into your car. It doesn't become concealed at that point.
That's right.
It becomes concealed when someone looking at you as a body could not recognize that you're carrying the firearm.
That's right.
Wherever it might be. So, and what was weird, if I recall, was even in West Virginia, when I first moved over here, you could strap it on your hip and walk around without any permit. But in order to put a jacket on and cover it, you had to have so if I were carrying a firearm open, you feel like that's backwards. You feel like, well, to hide it, if it's hidden, that should be okay. To wear it where everybody can see it, I should have to have some kind of special permit. But it was the opposite. So the weird thing exists where you could be wearing your firearm all day long. You're walking around, you're going shopping. It gets chilly at 5 o'clock when the sun goes down in the wintertime. You throw on a jacket. Now you're a felon.
Yeah. And the thing, when that was one of the major arguments that I used throughout the passage of that bill, I used that argument across the country in passage in other states is, literally it comes down to just that. It's covering your firearm, putting a jacket on when it gets cold. And that's crazy to me that, that someone could be inherently more dangerous because they've put an article of clothing on,
Right. Yeah. If you're legal to have it visible to everyone, which I would think would be more of a disruption. If I see somebody walk into a Walmart and I can't tell they're carrying, I'm not going to give them a second look.
Right.
If they're walking in and I see it on their hip, that's going to not cause me concern, but it's going to cause me to notice.
Yeah.
It's going to be more of a notice thing than so. Why would you want people to advertise as opposed? Plus, the way I understand it is it would kind of defeat the purpose of you having a element of surprise to defend yourself.
Yeah, to lose total tactical advantage,
right.
For sure. Yeah, and the thing is that I'm for however you want to carry your firearm, right? I think if you want to openly carry it, you should be able to openly carry it. If you want to conceal it, cool. I don't really care,
yeah.
But I do agree, especially as an instructor, that you lose an element of tactical advantage by openly carrying a firearm, especially if someone comes in to rob the place or do harm, and they may want to take out their swiftly take out their opposition.
When you first, I'm assuming, and I don't think you have a problem admitting this, I don't think anybody would believe any different, but you carry when you're traveling through the state, I assume. Do you ever, when you first started, how did that feel? Did it feel weird to you when that first became a freedom that you enjoyed, or did you feel, how did it change how you felt about just walking around, moving around, how you saw situations? Does it change your mentality at all when you're carrying a firearm?
Yeah, you know what? And it does, and it's a good question. So as far as like how I felt, and I think, in talking with several students and just other friends and folks that carry firearms, when you first start carrying a firearm, you'll hear a lot of people think that everybody's looking at them. They're like,
paranoid.
They're like, they can see it.
Yeah.
And they can't see it. They can't see your printing, most typically, unless you're...
What's printing?
That's where you have your shirt or jacket over it, and you can see the outline of the firearm.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Behind that. And it's one of those things where most people aren't going to be
that astute or that paying attention.
I wish they were, because a lot of stuff wouldn't happen that does, but it doesn't. But some of the other things about carrying a firearm is the immense responsibility that comes with it. And, you made a statement earlier, a armed society is a polite society. And your thoughts were, what if the other person has it? and I know as someone that carries a firearm extensively, if you're much more, it would be much more odd to catch me without a firearm than to catch me with it. And with that, it's, somebody does something or annoys you or, cuts you off in traffic or walks in a store and bumps into you and tells you, get the heck out of my way, you idiot. If you're not carrying and you had maybe a bad day, you might turn and go, excuse me, can I help you with something?
Right.
Carrying a firearm and understanding the responsibility and understanding how that situation could get escalated. It could get escalated even without the presence of the firearm.
Right.
But with the presence of the firearm, if it were to escalate to a physical altercation,
right. Well,
now it's a whole different element that you don't want.
Right. In other words, you have the power to take their life. They don't know that.
Right.
So you feel, if I hear what you're saying, you feel a greater obligation to avoid conflict because if this goes bad, I'm probably not going to lose. And I'm not saying that in a with bravado, like bragging, but I have an advantage they don't know about. It's probably not going to be a fair fight, and I don't want this. This is not worth escalating to that level. So therefore, I'm just going to walk by the guy. I'm going to move past the guy, or whatever. I'm going to let him go around me, whatever it is, because you don't want to use that serious stuff. I feel like there's a lot of, pardon me, when you hear people talk about, we're going to have all these crazy shootings at football games and people are going to, cut each other off in traffic and shoot at each other. What you're basically saying is the opposite is more likely for most people you've talked to, that they recognize I have an incredible responsibility with this. And one of those is to avoid the usage of it, not celebrate the usage of it.
Right. And the opposite isn't likely. The opposite is statistically factual, right? When we've passed these laws, that's one of the great things, whenever I go into these states is I can go in and say, look, your worries, I get it. I hear them all the time. I've heard them in several states. That's factually not happening.
That violence increases.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is that carrying a firearm, I believe, and getting into altercations where they be verbal or what have you, it brings clarity of stupidity, right? So you look at the instance, and Dirk, you and I have known each other a long, long time, and prior to certainly my son's being born and me carrying a firearm on a regular basis, I certainly didn't have clarity of stupidity. And if someone were to do any of those things to me, well, right, I may react significantly different.
Right.
But now you see it and you go, look, that's just dumb. And who knows why this person did that? Maybe they're having a bad day. Maybe they had a loved one that's in a bad situation. Maybe they just lost their job. Maybe they're on drugs. Maybe they're just a mean person, right? But that's not my problem. And if I escalate this now, it becomes very, very big problem of mine.
Yeah, and your career and what a lot of people don't know too is even though you read about people defending themselves with a firearm legally, whether someone breaks into their house or whether they're out in public and they're in a life endangering situation, you usually don't just walk away from that. Even if you're in the right, you usually get arrested. You usually go to the courts. You usually have to spend money for lawyers' bills, even when it's ultimately found that, hey, you were in the right, you defended yourself properly, you had every right to do what you did. It's not like if somebody even were to come into your house at night and you defend your family by using a firearm, and then all of a sudden you realize the cops are probably not just going to show up and go, oh, hey, okay, everything's cool. We'll see you later. Have a good rest of your night. Yeah. I see the pod dog has made it over to you.
That's right. So, and it's one of the things where, that's absolutely correct. And it's you think about it, and unless there is circumstances that make the whole scenario complete when the officers are there, and I mean complete, like
right.
A cop gets there and there's multiple witnesses, there's cameras on the building, there's everything that immediately these law enforcement officers can go, okay, bad guy, good guy.
Right.
Unless that can happen, that's going to
it's going to go through the courts.
yeah, absolutely. At least
you're not going to sleep in your own bed that
investigations, right?
night.
Even if the prosecutor decides not to prosecute the case,
Right.
it's still going to go through that process.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is scary, which is another responsibility that gun owners and gun supporters have to consider. If you're going to carry something, I once read something online from an instructor that said, I want you to understand how serious this is a decision you're making to carry. And he was somebody who taught, carry to get permit through the NRA. He said, you need to understand the responsibility you have. This is, if you don't, first he said, if you don't think you can pull the trigger to defend yourself, don't carry, because somebody will take the gun away from you and use it against you.
That's right.
But he said, the second thing is you have to understand that you're going to go to jail. You're going to go, no matter what the situation, you're going to go, you're going to get arrested, you're going to get booked, you're going to have thousands of dollars. But it comes down to whether each person's personal belief is my liberty worth more than my life?
Right.
And am I willing to go through that to defend myself or my family? And I've had friends that I've talked to about it who've said, well, one of my friends who unfortunately is no longer with us, but he not due to anything firearms related, who would say in college when we would talk about it, he'd say, I just don't think I would have a firearm in my house. I said, well, what if somebody broke in? What would you do? Well, I guess that would just be my time to go. And I went, okay, but now let me think about it in terms of what if you were married and you had children? Would you just chalk it up to it's their time to go, or would you feel a different? And he said, that's different. Where I work, I've had coworkers who are, because where I work, there are many more people who are with less gun experience, did not grow up around firearms and that kind of thing. And I had one person who I invited up one time to kind of go shooting, and they went, and they said, this is kind of fun. And then a few years later, the same person looked at me and said, my ADT burglar alarm went off, and it said it was a glass break sensor in my basement. And I looked around and I realized I didn't have anything to go down there with. And he's a golfer, so he said, I grabbed a golf club, But sometime when the moment hits, it may be something that you look differently at. And luckily for most of us, we live in a world where we never, ever have to defend our life.
That's right.
But it's kind of like a parachute in a plane or a life jacket on a boat. Most boats don't sink, but if you happen to be on one that does, it's sure going to be nice if there's a life jacket.
Yeah, right. Yeah, or a lot of people say a similar situation is there's like the police are here, that's their job. Well, there's firefighters, but I still have a fire extinguisher in my house.
Right.
Because
you can prevent the worst of it, or at least protect yourself to a certain degree.
That's right.
Because timing is a factor, especially in rural areas.
That's right.
And as I think about it, I was just thinking about, are rural areas more supportive of gun rights than urban areas? Maybe because of the demographics and the politics they would be, but it's ironic that urban areas are probably the places that see more crime.
That's right, way more. Yeah, and here in one of the things I've said a lot when people say, "Oh, the police are there to protect you." Well, one, the Supreme Court's already ruled on multiple occasions actually that law enforcement has no duty to protect you. So you are the literal only person that has a duty to protect
serve.
You. Yeah, serve. And protect, but
write a report.
But there's not an actual duty, law-bound duty to protect you.
Gotcha.
And they can't because, if for some reason somebody broke into the studio tonight and decided to go knife wielding on us.
Studio is a very generous word, but I thank you for using it.
Hey, I don't think the cameras can see around.
No.
So but I could then sue the
police officer for not saving your life.
Yeah, where was the county? Why?
Right.
I'm going to sue them because they weren't here to stop that.
So
from
from a
happening.
legalese, people go, what do you mean they don't have a duty to protect you?
They can't.
Not a legal duty.
Right.
Like a moral duty, an obligation to try to come in. But you're right. They couldn't be held legally. And they also have the, what's the term that they have, the police have that means you can't sue them sometimes? I forget what it is, but basically saying that legally you cannot hold them responsible for something they do wrong, but they also that means that you can't sue them for not being here when you needed them to be here. Right. And if you're in a rural area like we are, it could take 20 minutes to get an officer here.
Right.
They're not going to do much good except to clean up the mess at that point or write a report about it.
Right. But even in the urban metropolitan areas, which again, as you stated, is where the bulk of the crime happens. These are areas where there's a population of 250,000 or greater. That's what constitutes an urban metropolitan area, and in there we see high gang activity, high drugs, high unemployment, low education, high poverty, instances of broken homes, right? The father's not around. Those are all, social issues that are causing all these crimes. If we were to figure out ways to solve those, all crime would drop, firearm-related crime included. But, you look at the gang activity in these urban metropolitan areas or the drug activity with uses of firearms. If you're in a transaction, either a gang transaction or a drug transaction, and someone, pulls out a illegally possessed firearm, because in those circumstances, that's
most of those people are
not legal to do that.
Right.
So an illegally possessed firearm, and you commit a crime with that, there's not a cop that's going to be standing right there to stop that
Correct.
from happening.
Well, let's move into that a little bit, because now that we're talking about carrying and all that, let's talk. If I can get you to try to put on your opponent's hat for a minute, what are some of the things that you hear from people arguing against your position? What is their number one argument? I'm assuming most of them are, we need to ban guns. We need to outlaw gun ownership because we're tired of the school shootings. We're tired of the mass shootings. We're tired of, and you hear, well, we don't have this in any other country. Look at Australia. They don't have, look at England. They don't have, so there's a lot of reasons why America is not like other countries. In fact, our very existence of our country is based on, not arguably, a violent takeover of land. I mean, we came, we took. And the firearm was crucial in America's existence. And I think it is bigger in our culture. One of my questions to you was going to be, do you believe the gun represents something different in American culture, in the United States culture, than it does in other countries? Is that why there are more firearms in the United States, for example, than there are in many other countries?
Sure. And when we look at, as you said, the birth of our country, when we came over from the British, where we believe we were being overtaxed for nonsense, and there were other situations going on, one of the things was you can't possess a firearm. So, and you can't speak against the crown. There's all kinds of stuff that you can't do, right? So when our founders come over here, they said, look, you can say what you want. That's a hugely important right.
In our First Amendment still.
And God has given us the right. These aren't rights that are given by the government. These are inherent rights from our Creator, right? Mm-hmm. That's what our founding fathers said, the government didn't give you these. God gave these rights to you.
The same person that gave you life gave you these rights.
That's right, yeah. Absolutely. So you should be able to say what you want to say, certainly within reason. You can't yell fire in a room, that kind of stuff. But
criticism of your government, your officials.
Absolutely. And if you're going to do that, understand that you can protect yourself. So you have the right to keep and bear arms. And, and we'll hear all kinds of, well, you don't need all this firepower to hunt, and you don't need, magazines with a capacity.
Thank you for reading my mind, because I was going there.
Over 10 rounds or whatever number they want to use to hunt deer. Well, the Second Amendment isn't about hunting. It never was. It never will be. It was about, keeping a tyrannical government in check if need be. And look, we hope that that's never the case. I would certainly don't want, that to happen in my lifetime, certainly not my children's lifetime. But I believe strongly that our founding, it was based on the ability to be able to protect yourself. And at the time when they wrote the Second Amendment, people were like, oh yeah, well, fine, you can have muskets. And it's like, okay, well, if you want to go that route, and if that's the way you want to look at things, I want to go back to the purest form, the way that it was when the Second Amendment was written. And if we looked at the time, Joe down the street had the exact same firepower as the military at the
We
time.
kind of were our military
That's
at
right.
the time.
That's
The
right.
farmers were you put down your hoe and you picked up your firearm and you became the military.
Right. And there's going to be plenty of people say, well, we now have the National Guard for that. Nope, we're still, back years and years and years ago, they used to say that the American hunters were the largest army in the world. Now, that statement isn't necessarily the hunters. It's just American gun owners. It's the same
Right.
people. They just use it. Back then they said American hunters, I think probably because of, just the way that they wanted to say.
Well, and more people were hunters probably
Sure.
percentage-wise back in the day. We don't have
Absolutely.
to hunt for our meat as much as people did back then.
That's true. But, the thing is that I strongly believe that we have not been directly invaded by a ground force from another opposing country simply because of the firearms that are in the United States in the hands of law-abiding gun owners that would be willing to take to arms to defend
the
our
country.
country.
Well, it's kind of like a militia, just add water.
Right.
You know?
And the thing is that, and there will be people that I've heard them say it all the time. I have some close friends of mine that'll say, oh, do you really think that your AR-15 is going to be any defense against, either our country or other countries? And what I would say to that is, if we look at immediately what some of these other countries, including Ukraine, right, have done, immediately as soon as they were invaded, they started handing firearms out to their citizenry immediately. So it's like, it's funny to me, the people that are opposing me having these firearms are all about supporting Ukraine getting them, and it's like,
right. Well, that's the NIMBY, the not in my backyard. Like,
Right.
I don't want Harold next door to have one until, as they say, the stuff hits the fan. And then you want Harold to have one.
oh yeah,
you know?
yeah. I don't want. I love clean solar and wind power, but don't put that stuff right in my backyard.
Right,
Yeah,
exactly.
absolutely.
So you mentioned something there. Let's talk about this. An AR-15. First of all, clear one thing up. AR does not stand for assault rifle.
Armalite rifle.
And that's who made them first?
That's the original manufacturer. That's correct.
Where does the term assault rifle come from?
That comes from our friends in the media.
Okay, so it's not a term used in the gun industry.
Absolutely not. No, in the gun industry or in the sporting goods industry, it's either a modern sporting rifle, it's a semi-automatic rifle, it's a rifle. It's not. We don't say assault rifles. Now we do say ARs because
It's
AR is
the Armalite, right.
And
But it
it's
doesn't stand for assault
You
rifle.
still have the AR-10, the AR-15. You still have those variants. So we do use AR, but not. It doesn't stand for assault rifle. It never has.
When people say I want to ban assault rifles, then what kind of rifles are they talking about? Like when people say, "Oh, we need to ban all assault rifles," what do they know what they mean, or like
No.
what do they include?
Yeah. So and that is an intensely wide gamut of different firearms, and they don't understand. And what's one of the things that we've said? Can you define what an assault rifle is? And they either can't or they will not. And
Or they'll say the thing that looks scary. I mean, because an AR-15 has a look to it, and I'll probably put some pictures up throughout our conversation, but the AR-15 has a look to it that you go, oh, I've seen that in war movies, therefore that counts. Versus a hunting rifle, which could do the same thing, I'm guessing, but yet it doesn't look scary, so therefore, okay, well, that one's fine because it looks like the rifle my grandfather used to hunt deer with.
yeah, and
Turns out those rifles kind of can do the exact same thing.
worse. When you look at an AR-15 rifle in a chambered in .223,
Which is what? What does that mean to the common?
it's not much larger in diameter than a .22 rifle, right?
Okay, which is a small caliber.
Very small caliber.
22 stands for 22 hundredths of an inch,
That's
right?
right, yep.
Okay, so a quarter of an inch, basically.
That's right.
Smaller than that.
That's right. So if you look at that if you watch The View, they'll say, oh, if you shoot a deer with a AR-15, it explodes and you can't use the meat, and that's absolutely not true. It's laughable actually, but you can hunt In fact, I have pictures of my sons with their after harvesting a deer, and with an AR-15. It's just a very comfortable, easily used, customizable rifle, and that's all it is. But as far as deadly goes,
I've heard people say it's the Barbie doll of rifles.
Sure,
you find all the accessories you need, and you can dress it up the way you want to.
And you can, and the reason that is because it is America's most popular rifle. There are more AR-15s or AR variant rifles in American hands lawfully than any other rifle.
What about people who say, well, it's a gun designed to kill people. It's its only purpose was designed to kill people. Is there an argument against that?
All guns are designed to kill people.
Okay.
All guns are designed, and it's to kill. I don't know if and it's one of those things where, whether it's but the bad guy, right? You're not out to shoot a good guy. That's not what they're designed for. And the AR-15 has much, much broader uses and is used, frankly, much more significantly for sporting purposes, for targets.
I don't live out west, but I know a lot of people in the Midwest, coyotes, hogs, feral hogs, things that either hurt their crop or invade their cattle or, things like that because of the accuracy, because of the, should I say, I hate to say ease, but because of the ease of use, it's a rifle that's very comfortable for a lot of people to use at a distance to defend whatever.
Right. Well, and the big thing is that, and this is where people get with like the adjustable buttstocks and such. It's like that just makes that firearm easy for me to use, easy for my sister to use,
Gotcha.
My stepdaughter to use. Anyone can use that one specific firearm without having to go, well, now I need to get a smaller stock,
Gotcha.
Which is taking, there's a lot that goes into removing.
Different arm lengths, different reaches.
Absolutely.
So it's basically, you can customize it to fit.
That's right. But if you take that firearm and then you take like my 30-06 hunting rifle you throw a real nice scope on a 30-06 bolt action or semi-automatic, whichever, and that is significantly more deadly. But it certainly does a lot more damage.
Just because of the larger size of the projectile.
Right.
And the faster speed, more powder in the rifle round.
It's much more powerful. But because that looks like granddaddy's rifle,
people don't get afraid of it.
Nobody's scared of that one.
Right. So you mentioned bolt action and semi-automatic. One of the things that I was looking up as I was looking through stuff for this podcast, semi-automatic represents an AR-15 is semi-automatic, which means that every trigger pull, one projectile comes out.
That's right.
There is no, as people say, that's fully automatic, and that's against the law throughout the U.S. unless you get a special permit.
Right. Yeah, you have to get a Class 3 license, which is $200 and an extensive background check.
Okay, so for the average person, people own these semi-automatic rifles, which literally means one trigger pull, one bullet.
That's right.
Boom.
Yep.
All that semi-automatic means is that I don't have to do anything to fire a second round. I just pull the trigger again.
Yeah, semi-automatic means is that it is the only thing that's automatic is the cycling of the
firearm.
Right, and it cycles in a new cartridge ready to be fired. Instead
So,
of you having to grab either the bolt and pull it back to extract the spent casing,
right,
and push forward to bring the new cartridge into the chamber,
right,
or a lever on some, or on a
like a pump shotgun.
That's
maybe,
right.
Where you're cycling the action yourself.
That's right.
So what would you say percentage-wise? I didn't ask you to prepare this ahead of time, but I'm guessing you probably have a number in your head. What percent of firearms that are out there, they talk about all the firearms that are out there in the United States, would be semi-automatic?
The gross majority.
Okay, 75% or more.
Probably.
So when people say, well, the AR-15, we need to ban semi-automatic rifles, they would literally be banning 75% of the guns that are out there.
Yeah, and that's what they mean.
Okay. Well, do you think, to be fair, do they all mean that, or do some just not know?
I think as far as people go, just generally people on the street, they don't know.
Okay.
Right? They don't understand.
Because that's my impression.
Right.
I think lawmakers know, especially lawmakers that are bent on restricting rights.
Right.
But I think a lot of people, and this is one of the reasons I wanted to have you in, I think a lot of people that have not had an experience, because they have a preconceived notion from what they see on TV shows and in movies, that, which is another whole thing about that sometimes, I guess I'm showing my bias a little bit, actors who make billions of dollars in movies with shoot 'em up scenes and then they come out against firearms. And
That's
I go,
right.
that you literally just made your bank on that. But I think a lot of people honestly just don't know, because even people that I work with, when you talk to people and I ask people questions, what would you want me to ask you when you came in? What should I ask on the podcast? And I recognize that they don't know the difference between a lot of these. So like an old revolver, like you'd have in the Old West, that would not be semi-automatic because but theoretically, one trigger pull is one bullet and it cycles itself to the next round.
That's right.
It's literally as fast as you can pull the trigger, but you only have 6 or 8 shots maybe and something like that.
That's
as opposed to.
And I'll tell you, my dad was a huge revolver fan or wheel gun guy, depending on the terminology you want to use. And I can assure you, my father, when, during the times that we were out shooting together a lot and we were well within practice, I recall a time like it was yesterday that we were out in Jones Springs, West Virginia, which is, out in the woods out past Hedgesville. And we were at a range out there. And I had a 9mm full-size H&K USP, great pistol. Love that pistol.
Okay.
And
which was semi-automatic.
Which is a semi-automatic.
Bang, bang, bang.
Yep.
Okay.
Pull the trigger, off it goes. Right. My dad had a full-size 45 caliber revolver, which is a big. It's a hand cannon, so to speak.
Well, compared,
it's
it's twice the size of a 22 round.
Yeah.
So
it's
almost half an inch.
Yeah, it's massive, right? Yeah. So, and it boasts a lot of power, and a 45 long Colt, so it's even bigger than that. So, but either way, he could shoot that revolver just as fast, if not faster than I, and with just as much, if not more, accuracy than I. And so to say that one is more dangerous or more deadly than the other is just incorrect.
Yeah. And speaking of children, let's go on to this. The worst part of today's podcast, we talk about the shootings that happen, whether they're in schools, whether they're in malls. Why is it happening?
There is
from a gun supporter's point of view,
So
and also, if I can add on, sorry to interrupt, how opponents of yours would argue, how is it that you can advocate for more gun ownership when we have all these mass shootings? Are you tone deaf to that?
Sure.
That's the question you hear people say, like people that I'm around with. How in the world can they advocate for more gun ownership when we have so many problems already?
Right. Yeah. No. And that's we hear, and I hear that a good bit as well. And no, I'm not tone deaf. I just believe strongly in our constitutional rights and my ability to be able to protect myself and my family or others. Should the need arise. But as far as why they're happening, look, we have a significant and very serious mental health issue in this country that needs addressed. We see circumstances where, our youth are confused about a lot of things and some pretty big things, right? And if you're confused, and they're being told it's okay to be confused about some of this stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Instead of folks looking to help them, they're looking to pacify, and which I believe, I'm not a mental health expert or
understood
or doctor by any means, but I believe that doesn't help, and it to pacify some of these folks and their mental illness that they have. Can be leading to the confusion and then I see across social media, which I know this is different topic and this is an opinion, but if you have children, keep them off social media as long as you can.
Agreed.
It's just a vile place.
Channels like this.
Yeah. Right. It's just a vile place. It really is where we've seen the change in society where people wouldn't really speak their mind or wouldn't be entitled to speak their mind on issues. Now speaks their mind to a total strangers online and says some really, really mean stuff. And I think that, all of this falls into play, that the greater circumstance is that we've lost respect for human life.
And the ability to communicate.
Absolutely.
I agree with you 100%. We were very careful with our kids to keep them off as long as we could. And it's a ridiculously difficult fight, because many parents don't recognize the damage. And even though YouTube may have a limit of 13, their kids are on it at 7.
Oh, of course. Or
they've got an Instagram, or they've got their Pinterest, or their I'm showing my age here by not knowing the newer ones, the TikToks, and they've got, or Snapchats or whatever. And so you have an 8-year-old on Snapchat being exposed to things that they have no business being exposed to. So part of it may be a lack of parenting, is what I'm hearing you say. And the mental health thing, I think, is really important. My dad said that he said, I always feel like the world is moving faster than our brains were designed to handle. The 24-hour news cycle and the vitriol that comes out on the internet. Like, the internet is an infinitely useful place. However, with one good comes one bad. And so it's also, it used to be, because I work with teenagers a lot, they come to school and they're fine, and they get bullied at school sometimes. And it used to be, when I was little, when you went home from school, you didn't get bullied because there was no way to get bullied when you were at home. Now it's 24/7.
Right.
They go online, they get bullied. They're in their Discord groups, and they get bullied. They're on Snapchat, they get bullied. And so the world is moving so much faster, and everybody seems to be in their own echo chamber of belief systems. What can we do? Let's assume the average person, I think we're all born with, I hate to use the word normal people, but I'm going to say it for lack of a better term. I think all normal people are born with a preservation of human life element, even our own. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I think we could agree, though, that in order for me to take someone's life, something has to go wrong in my brain to get to that point.
I believe that that's the definition of mentally ill.
Right.
Yes, absolutely.
And so, with the exception of it's me or you, like you break into my house at 2 a.m., I'm in my bed, you're coming at me with a knife, and I pull my gun and fire it to protect myself or my family, that's not a mentally ill decision. But to lose your anger over getting fired from a job, or getting dumped by a girlfriend, or getting picked on at school enough to carry a gun back into that place, something has to go wrong up here.
Yeah.
So how do we when people say, oh, the solution is to take guns away, I think, okay, well, let's back up for a second. Let's extrapolate that. What about drunk driving? Is the answer to take cars away? And I know people hate the saying that, like, well, guns don't kill people, people kill people. But cars don't drunk and drive, people drink and drive.
That's right.
And I know people might not like hearing that, but how do we find these people before they get this far? How do we, I think that's the problem, right?
Yeah. It's absolutely,
because it's not like, as a gun supporter, sorry to jump in, it's not like you're rooting for people to go out and mow down a bowling alley full of people.
No.
You don't want that.
Absolutely
so
not. It
just because you
devastating for
support
everybody.
gun rights doesn't mean you don't care or you're tone deaf about these other things, like we talked about earlier. But how do we find these people? How do we... I get passionate about it because I think we all agree we want it to stop.
Right. Yeah.
There's no legitimate person in this country, NRA president all the way down to city dweller, that goes, oh, I don't care if people get mowed down.
Absolutely
Nobody
not.
likes this.
No, of course not. And so here's the thing. And let's look at your argument that you say, well, if we just took guns away, that would stop the crime, right? We would be able to do away with it. If we got rid of the AR-15s, right, we would be able to do everything. Crime would stop.
And by the way, I'll pad for you a little bit, because I did not tell you questions ahead of time until you got here, and I just kind of mentioned what we wanted to go over. So if you're thumbing through to pull up some statistics, I didn't prepare Art. I didn't tell him what I was going to ask before he showed up today.
That's right. So let's look at it, right? Let's go in the soonest data that we have available is 2019.
Is this like crime?
This is the FBI's database.
Okay.
This is the crime data statistics.
National FBI statistics.
It is FBI.
Okay.
This isn't coming from the NRA. This
Right.
isn't, biased in any way. This is straight facts,
Right.
numbers from the FBI. So 2019 is the latest that we have. And if you were to say AR-15s, they're bad, right? They're the big bad firearm.
The assault rifle, 15.
That's right. That's right.
I'm
so,
jokingly misnaming it.
that's
because
right.
That's what people think AR stands for.
So, and we agree. We've already stated we agree. Any life lost prematurely is a total tragedy and devastating and should not happen, right? But how many people do we have in the country right now?
Is it 300 billion?
Yeah, million.
Million?
Yeah.
I
So-
always forget the illion.
Right. Yeah. So
Big difference.
right. So how many do you think in 2019 were shot or were murdered by an AR rifle?
I would think less than what people. I don't know any of these numbers.
What do you think if you were to ask that question to anybody in your profession?
Right.
What do you think they would say?
I think a lot of people would say higher number than it is because
thousands.
that's what we see.
Right, thousands.
And when you see these guys going into and I don't know what the national number of total people, but by percent, I would think most people would think, well, at least half, maybe 60%, 70%.
Right. Yeah. All rifles combined, not just the AR, all rifles combined, 364.
364 people.
Yeah,
in the course of one calendar year.
Yeah, deaths.
Now, I know that in Washington, D.C. or in New York, I've heard on the news the other day, I think they're at 334 deaths in New York, murders already,
right.
just in the city of New York this calendar year.
Let's say that we took away firearms.
Long.
Let's say we took away firearms.
Oh, firearms.
Let's say we got rid of the guns.
Okay.
They're gone.
Government came to your house.
They're gone. Nobody has one.
Okay.
So that same year, 364, all rifles, right? 364. How about knives or other cutting instruments? What do you think?
You would guess, You would guess less.
Uh-huh. Nope. It's more than triple. It's 1,476. No. Yeah, 1,476, right? So now let's say that...
So your argument, if I can jump to the argument part, is if we're worried about the hierarchy of what's killing Americans, the rifle is much lower on the list than your pocket knife.
It's not only lower than your pocket knife, and I challenge anybody that's listening, go to the FBI uniform crime table and look. If we got rid of it, blunt objects, I'm talking about, or let's even go more than that. Yeah, let's go more than that. Let's not even take bats into it, right? Let's keep all that out of it. Let's ignore every weapon that we have, and let's just go to personal weapons, hands, fists, feet, etc. This is what they use, not what I'm saying.
Okay.
Their description: personal weapons, hands, fists, feet, etc.
So you literally beat someone to death or kick them with no weapon,
Right.
other than yourself.
So we've established it 364
for firearms,
for all rifles.
Rifles.
Yeah,
thank
all
you.
rifles.
And 1,400 for knives.
Right. But yeah, 1476.
Okay.
What do you think for hands, fists, feet, etc.?
Ironically, I might guess higher just because everybody's got those.
Yeah, 600.
600.
600. So, and the year before that, it was 712. The year before that, it was 715. The year before that, 668 and 651 before that, while the firearm was lower,
Gotcha.
Much lower. And they were much lower before. And are we going to see an uptick in 2020? We are going to see an uptick. The crime did increase. All crime increased.
Yeah.
And there was a national, a global circumstance that locked us in our homes.
Right.
And really helped out with this whole mental health problem.
It was terrible for a lot of people, of course.
It's hugely problem. And again, it was a circumstance that we even look at people that were, sane folks. There's nothing in any way mentally unstable about that person. And that pandemic affected them so negatively that it paralyzed them, right? I know people personally that were paralyzed by this circumstance.
I talked to a friend of mine who's my physician, and I asked her, and she said, People are having trouble finding primary care doctors. People are having trouble. She said, we've had a mental health crisis in our country for 10 years, and this did not help. This has just made everything even worse. People need help. People need assistance. And so is there a way through all of the laws, filling out the forms when you go to purchase a firearm, getting a permit, getting background checks done, getting all this done, is there a way to find these people, or what would if somebody said to you, as I know you're not speaking as the NRA, you're speaking as an individual, but if I said to you, Art, what can we do, or what would you suggest we do to try to keep hands of people who are marginally, and because you hear about these red flag laws and yellow flag laws where it's like, well, if I think you're a problem, I can call as a family member of yours, let's say if we were related, I can call and say, hey, Art's having a tough time. His wife just left him. He's down in the dumps. I'm not sure he's drinking a lot, whatever.
Yep.
All this is fictitious. Just to be clear.
Yep.
And I think somebody needs to take his guns away. In some states they can.
Sure.
And in some states they can't.
That's right. So, and we hear, and especially after some of these shootings, we hear the increase interest in red flag laws, and people. I was just on the radio a week or so ago about this, and the gentleman who is a highly intelligent, retired Navy admiral, great guy, right? I mean, very highly respected, and in the community and in his life, and he said that he's a fan of red flag laws, and because of his intelligence and his honesty, he said, now I understand that the data shows that these don't help, right? They don't do anything to move the needle one way or the other. Yeah, that is true. Okay. Yeah, they do nothing to move the needle one way or the other. He said, but we have to do something. And I hear that argument a lot, and I'm like, okay, but if you came home and you said to one of your children, man, your room is trashed. You need to go clean your room. It's filthy. Go clean your room. And you walked out 10 minutes later, and they're running the vacuum in the living room. Your questions would be like, what are you doing?
Yeah, I figured I would do something.
Yeah, Dad, I got to do something, right? You have to address the problem.
Right.
And they say, well, the red flag laws would address the problem. Well, one, it totally circumvents due process, which is a big, big issue. But
meaning being charged with a crime, being convicted of a crime before you're found,
right.
Be innocent before proven guilty.
Yeah, this is red flag laws are absolute in guilty until proven innocent, because they come and they take your firearms on the basis that someone said that you are a danger to yourself or others, right? An immediate, serious danger to yourself or others.
And I'm not even going to go to the side that it could be used maliciously against people.
Right, yeah.
Like you're in a divorce and your wife wants to get back, so your wife could call and say, hey, look, I left him and he's angry. He threatened me, and the next thing you know.
Right, and we've seen that happen.
Knock at the door.
We've seen that happen.
Lucky the pod dog didn't bark at that.
And there's we've seen that the abuse in other states that allow it. West Virginia red flag laws are actually illegal, but but let's toss all that out. Let's not care about that. I do, but let's not in this circumstance. But you're telling me that this person is such a danger to themselves or others that you need to come and take away an inanimate object, in this circumstance a firearm, right? But then you're going to leave them to all the other devices at their disposal, their car, their knives, as we've proven, the FBI has proven is going to be more dangerous. Your fist, all that kind of stuff, kicking somebody, whatever you're going to do. You've though left the one thing you told me was immediately dangerous to themselves or others, and that's the person, right? So why aren't we taking the person for an immediate mental evaluation, right? If you're telling me, hey, you're a bad guy, or we believe you're very dangerous, why are you not taking them for an immediate mental evaluation where a mental health professional can take me out of the argument? They can take the anti-gun lobby out of the argument. They can take everybody that cares one way or the other totally out of the argument, because now a mental health professional has certified this person either mentally needs some help or they're okay, right? And people say, well, yeah, but now with attorneys and everything else. Well, no, because under red flag law, you get they come over, they take your firearms. Now you have to hire an attorney. You have to take time off of work. You have to tell your boss, well, I was, they told me
Somebody
that
red flagged me.
somebody red flagged me. So now your boss, likely, whether they want to or not, even if they're your best friend, they may go, wait,
that's a liability.
is there a problem?
Yeah.
Is he going to come in here? Now how am I going to react to this person?
Yeah.
There's so many circumstances where this is just bad. Where if you say, hey, Dirk, we've been notified that some circumstances have happened, and we believe that you may be an immediate threat to yourself or others. Right. So look, I understand you probably don't want to, but you're going to need to come with us. We're going to put you down with a mental health professional.
Put you down might be the wrong term, but
I know
what you mean.
Yeah,
we're going to put you down now,
maybe
sir.
Not that way. We're going to sit you down with a mental health professional, and you guys can discuss this. And at the end of that, we can realize: do you need some mental health help,
right,
or are you good to go?
Yeah,
and and also, sir, you may be able to offer us some insight to why, if there is a circumstance of abuse or potential issues, you may be able to offer some insight into that as well.
Sure.
But we won't do that because it's costly and it's not sexy, right? So the politicians don't want to do that. They just want to say, I'm going to take the guns away.
Is it partially because they don't want to have people saying, well, now you're not just taking away an item, you're taking away my freedom.
Right.
Is that a legitimate argument?
Sure. And there is that's the guy the admiral that I was talking about. He actually made mention of that. He was like, it's, you're taking my basic freedom. And it's like, you're already doing that. You're already taking my constitutional freedoms. You're already, risking my job.
You're violating a freedom.
I'm going to spend tens of thousands of dollars likely to defend this circumstance.
Right.
Or maybe I don't have the money to defend that. So now I'm just hosed, right? Yeah. That, and that's just wrong.
Yeah.
Now you've been convicted or you're sitting under a red flag law because you don't have the means to defend yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me switch gears real quick. And I had mentioned a timeline for you, and I know you have other places you need to be, so let me know if we run out of time. But so let's go to the high-capacity magazine argument real quick. Mm-hmm. People say, oh, well, and I know we've talked earlier about the Second Amendment, not about hunting, but let's talk about, well, why do you need a 30-round magazine? Why do you need a 20-round? What about, because I think the other most legitimate argument, and again, I guess I'm classifying here, but I think a very legitimate argument is, and please tell me if this is the wrong way to assume, if I can walk into someplace with a 30-round magazine, I can do damage more quickly than I can if I can only fire 6 shots and then I have to reload. Is that a legitimate argument? Why or why not? And what's wrong with the idea of at least starting with, hey, I don't want this guy to be able to walk in and fire 30 rounds before he's even got to pause and take a breath. Why can't we limit him to 5 rounds? Or why? Because what are the arguments against that? Is that a legitimate thing, or what do we worry about if we said all of a sudden, hey, we're just going to limit, everybody gets 5 shots, that's it? Why not?
Mm-hmm. So when it comes to the 30-round magazines, standard capacity magazine of an AR-15, right? That's what they come with. You look at that, and in circumstances where there has been shootings where an AR-15 is involved and a magazine with a capacity of 30 rounds was in play, a lot of times there's a lot of rounds sitting in these magazines where they dump them and they reload before they even have spent every cartridge.
No, that's you saying that. You don't have any reason to mislead me. I know you would.
I would and I tell everybody, everybody that I always talk to,
go look it up.
Look it up.
Yeah.
I promise you that
I know this is your business, so I tend to trust, and I know you as a person that you're not going to try to come on and lie. So, but people always say, "Oh, come on, I don't believe that."
Yeah.
Like,
go look it up.
Please go look.
Yeah, absolutely.
I know you're not
Simple
purposely
Google.
misrepresenting
No, absolutely
anything.
not. Absolutely not. So now we've realized, or the people realize that doesn't really matter. People don't really.
So
use
they
them.
might use 10 or 15
Maybe.
and they walk to a new room, and in that case they have time to reload. So they do a tactical reload or something so that they can have multiple.
And most typically, these folks aren't doing anything tactical, right? They're just dropping their mag, reloading, and they don't even probably know why, or they don't have any rhyme or reason rather of why they're doing it. But
it's not a Navy SEAL operation.
No, absolutely not. But let's get down to standard capacity magazines and handguns, right? Well, why don't we just limit everybody to 5 or to 8? My firearms, the one that I carry on a most regular basis, has a standard capacity magazine, which it came with it from the factory, of 15 rounds, plus 1 in the chamber, that's 16 rounds. That's standard capacity. Now, if you look at Google law enforcement in shooting encounters, and look, they're going to be difficult to watch, right? I mean, because it's all out there, it's plentiful, and they are very difficult to watch. But I challenge you to see what they do to neutralize the threat on their life.
Meaning that they're not going to stop after 3 or 4 or 5 rounds to make sure, or they need more.
And they're changing magazines several times.
And I feel like we've been John Wicked and born identitied into believing that even well-trained police officers hit their mark 70 to 80% of the time, or 90%. You see these assassin movies where people are like spinning around and shooting in one bullet right center mass or one bullet. In real gunfights, there are many more misses than hits.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, and it's unfortunate, and I don't, mean this any negatively whatsoever towards law enforcement. But again, if you Google statistics and hit ratios between a private citizen and a law enforcement officer, the folks that all these people say just let them have the guns, you know what? Just go look at it yourself.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Just go look at it. See what the accuracy and the hit ratio of a law enforcement officer, proficiency of a law enforcement officer versus a private citizen.
On average.
You would be, that you can do a whole new podcast, Dirk, on just that.
All right.
And it will be interesting.
That'll give the audience something to go Google.
That's
because that if the way you're hinting at it, I'm guessing that it would not be what we'd expect.
No, and it would not be,
and look, not even something that might make us feel more safe or comfortable.
Absolutely not. It is. You will see a devastatingly different inaccuracy.
Okay.
It's significant
I'm
difference.
assuming they're comparing in stress situations,
right,
like when a police officer is called to a shooting scene versus a private citizen defending him or herself.
Where they're very well trained for this specific situation.
Okay.
That's correct. So, and the circumstances sit, and it's unfortunate, but what I believe when it comes down to that scenario is, there's probably a bunch of different factors. But one is, the funding that we have for our police and being able to go out and practice their marksmanship, and where, the private citizen is out plinking for fun, for hobby, right?
Yeah.
So
we hear it here. I often think about the people where I teach, if they lived where I live. Like, it's not uncommon here where I live to sit out on the back porch and hear 2 or 3 different places where people are just out plinking on a Sunday afternoon. It always makes me wonder if somebody from the city, quote unquote, came to visit and heard that, they would be alarmed by it. But here it's just kind of, it's just Tom. He's over there practicing his shooting, or it's just, and so you don't even think about it over here.
And you think, and let's put, people are like, the cops are going to want to go shoot their guns. That's all they carry one around all the time. They're going to want to go shoot it. But, Dirk, you teach music for a living, right? Mm-hmm. When you come home in the evenings, do you want to
go teach music?
Music?
Right. Yeah.
No. Or even pick up an instrument most typically? Right. Unless it's new and you're like, I want to do something specific to this, which certainly there are law enforcement officers that have that. But you may want to come home and practice with your handgun or your rifle or what have you.
But to them, it's not a novelty. It's to them, it's their job. And
that's right.
Maybe, and again, not all officers, but some officers, hey, I take the gun belt off. I come home. It's now my time to kind of not deal with all of those things I'm paid to deal with all day long. Would you arm teachers in school buildings. What's your thought process on that? Or what do you think? Are there any arguments against it legitimate in your mind? Are there any arguments for it legitimate? Like, what do you think if you were the governor of Artopia, and how would you go about protecting kids in schools better to avoid some of these school shootings that specifically?
Sure. So first and foremost, I believe that there should be a school resource officer, that being a police officer in every school. I don't mean sharing his time between multiple locations like they do here in West Virginia and certainly other states as well. I mean, every school has an officer. I don't know actually if I want them in uniform or not. Maybe a polo, or something.
And to be fair, I didn't ask you to plan out a plan for a county school system here, but just your gut instincts.
But let's say that can't happen, and it's very difficult for that to happen because of the funding, right? Our funding sources are not permissive to allow that to typically happen. So the next scenario that we're faced with, and we can say unfortunately if we need to, but is a circumstance where we have to be able to protect these children. We protect every other institution, of government, whether it's our courthouses, our judges, our commission buildings, with firearms, but we don't our schools for whatever reason that may be. And I'll hear people, even I had a former dating partner that was that mentioned that they were absolutely opposed to teachers carrying firearms in the school. And the reason that she said that she was opposed to teachers carrying firearms in school was because she didn't trust these people to be able to carry a firearm safely within the building. And that what are these, I don't want to say she used idiots, but she certainly, portrayed it that way. What these folks going to do is she couldn't trust that they wouldn't just go all cowboy or what have you, whatever terminology.
Same argument people make for why you couldn't conceal carry.
Right. And I said to her, and I say to others, if you don't trust this teacher to effectively defend your child, if the need should arise, because they may do something crazy with the firearm, you've entrusted your child with this person. Yeah. You're worried about entrusting him with a firearm, but you've entrusted literally what you tell me, and rightly so.
Your most valuable asset, right?
Period. Your child. Yeah, your child. It's incredible to me. But so absolutely, I would arm the teachers. But there's ways that works. There's a bill that has come through West Virginia the last couple of times. I suspect it will go through the legislature again this coming session. We opposed it the last time, and the reason that we opposed it,
beating the NRA,
the NRA, okay. and not necessarily like threw a bunch of weight. We just said, yeah, we're not a fan, and the reason being is because of the shall versus may language, right? The way that these bills have read is that a school board may permit teachers to carry a firearm. Should they decide that they would like to do that.
And may means that there's still discretion on whether they allow the teacher to or not. The NRA, would prefer shall, which means if a teacher expresses interest, they would be allowed to.
Right, yeah. So if the state is telling this county that they may allow this if they would like, Dirk, that's going to be no different than you going and telling your children they may clean their room.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, if you want to.
Yeah. No,
right.
You shall clean your room. Right. And that's where this needs to happen. Is it needs to be, hey, you shall permit teachers. And look, there are circumstances that go at play. There's several pieces of training. They come down to Charleston to the state police.
Yeah.
And they go
what if they qualified? My argument always was, when people ask me and I say, I don't know, but let me ask you this question. A police officer is, and again, I'm a very big supporter of law enforcement. I know everybody feels the need to clarify before they make statements, but a police officer is nothing but a person like me who has been trained, perhaps extensively in different areas, with a firearm, how to handle situations, how to do whatever. But they started off as a guy like me. Mm-hmm. So if a guy like me is a teacher and I go through the same training, I don't necessarily need all of the same training because I'm not going to deal with all of the same situations.
Right.
But if I can qualify specifically on a firearm with the same accuracy level and same requirements as a police officer, how am I any different than somebody who's wearing a badge as far as my responsibility with a firearm?
I have a better question for you. Considering all of what you've just said, would it not be an easy way of thought that you probably have a better understanding of the capacity of that building, your classroom, the way that the students probably move? When you've seen fights and stressful situations within the student body, you know how they react.
Right.
Most typically, you know who's gonna shimmy right, who's gonna dive left. Right. You know that. So an officer walking into that circumstance doesn't know that.
Right.
You know, you have intimate knowledge of that situation in that building.
That's a good point.
That I believe makes you better already to carry a
like
firearm
if this is
and
just,
defend the circumstance.
If this is just Tommy and he throws a trash can once in a while because his dad left the house and he's angry about it, and there's no need to let this escalate, and if you let Tommy burn for a second, he'll burn out.
Right.
As opposed to somebody else coming in and thinking Tommy's going to escalate and pull a fire. You know, I can see what you mean. So it's kind of like you know your own family, you know your own children the best. When they throw a temper tantrum, other people go, "Oh my gosh, should we intervene?" No, they'll burn out. And it's like, you're right about that. That's a good point.
And you
because
know,
officers are at a huge disadvantage in any situation when they walk in, unless they've dealt with that family or that house or that they don't know what they're going to find when they get there.
Right. And let's be blunt. You know, our society, for whatever reason, has really put down law enforcement officers. They're not looked at nearly the same way whenever I was growing up. You know, when I was growing up, it was, hey, that person's a law enforcement officer. If you're ever in a circumstance where you need help or you're scared,
right,
or you go to them. You find one of them, you go to them, hey, I need help. Right? Now, they are
seen as the enemy in a lot of cases.
A lot of cases, right? And where in your classroom, I'm sure that you have the little Johnny, right? That's just a pain in the butt in one of your classes.
No, they're all wonderful, Art. I love every one of them.
Yeah, of course. But, you know, you're not being looked at. You're not being told, which I'm confident that someone in your class, in one of your classes, is being told that law enforcement is their enemy.
Oh,
right?
I'm sure they are, yeah.
So you're not. They're not telling that.
Right.
You're not the enemy.
Right.
So if there were a scenario where you know, something bad is going down to the point where you're going to have to defend your life and their lives, you slam that door. And little Johnny's is the total class clown, right? And he's always giving you grief, but you slam that door and you look at him with the intensity of I'm now faced with a decision that I've never wanted to be faced with in my life. Mm-hmm. He will understand that, I believe, and say,
even better.
I understand, Mr. Krause, Art.
Yeah.
I'm good. What do I got to do? Where a cop, they may look at that significantly different.
There's no doubt that having a relationship with the person trying to handle the situation is going to helps any situation. It's why negotiators are trained to say certain things and not say certain things. It's about building trust. And if you're a teacher, I never thought of it this way. If you're a teacher and you've already built a trust relationship with a student better than a random law enforcement officer who might respond to the call,
right,
you might have a better chance of solving the problem without violence.
Right. And in every one of these bills that have been either passed in some states or been introduced in others, there's circumstances like nobody knows you have the gun. You can't tell anybody you have the gun.
Right.
It's total.
Do most principals know? Like, for example,
the administration will know.
Right.
But outside of that, they're not even allowed to tell anybody.
Gotcha.
Right. So
and there are some states that do. Texas, I think.
Yeah, Texas does. Look, West Virginia could.
Right.
You know, the way that our law is written, if the superintendent of schools in Berkeley County decided that they wanted to allow this to happen, they could.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but it's a and I've taken firearms, even non-functional firearms, into classrooms for educational purposes for years.
Yeah, I've heard that. I mean, I know that's allowed in West Virginia. They do it at some of our local technical colleges and all that kind of stuff.
So it's the way that the law is written. It's already permissive.
Yeah.
You know, it's just it's not
It's not politically.
It's not specified that for this purpose.
Yeah.
Right?
What do you think holds the states back? What do you think the biggest argument is? It that the general population is uncomfortable having the idea of a gun around 700 students?
Sure. I think that
it's ugly.
Yeah.
We don't want to admit that it's necessary.
Right. Yeah. There's the political circumstances of it. There's the as you pointed out, we have to now admit that we have a problem.
Right.
And then, the other side of it, I just had a blank, but is liability purposes, right?
Fair.
They're probably worried that if something were to go down,
and you had to fire your firearm and you accidentally hit somebody who was not involved in the situation,
whatever the circumstances are, right? That now even the mental exposure,
that's true,
of seeing something like that, they're probably worried about that. And look, in all of these bills, and it's unfortunate that we have to to spell this stuff out, but there are clear in there as far as the oh my gosh, I just had another lock on my brain.
That's okay. It's like the indemnity,
they do indemnify, So that's
it's like the Good Samaritan laws,
it's similar to that, but either way, the
teacher can't be held liable for.
We release liability. That's even like when we did the employer parking lot bills here in West Virginia, we called it the Business Liability Act, right? And you're releasing liability of the institution. Should they decide to protect their kids.
I just used the gift of the internet, Art, to remember qualified immunity was the term I was looking for earlier with law enforcement.
Has, yep.
So maybe it would be the same with teachers. There's a qualified immunity that comes with your job, whereby if you're like the Good Samaritan law, if you stop and try to help someone by giving them CPR, they can't sue you if you do something incorrect. Well, I do appreciate there's so much more conversations about this. Let's finish up by let me ask you one final question. Where do you see, what is the trajectory of our country now, for good or for bad, as far as our attitude towards firearms? Like, what do you see as the overall national trend? It feels like to me that because of the violence increase, people are warming to the idea of firearm ownership more than we have in the past. But that's just my little picture. What do you see nationally? Because you work with a lot of different states.
Sure.
And where do you think, what's the next 10 years going to look like?
So one of the things that we had was, you looked at several years ago, 12, 14, and firearms in our election processes were very prevalent, and both sides used them as a tool to encourage
motivate
voters.
The vote.
Right, exactly. Well, then you look at 16, 18, 20, and they were near non-existent, right? And what happened during that time? Well, we had the Seattle circumstances where there was, they took over the police station and everything else. There was the movement to defund the police. And in all of those circumstances, the folks that were sitting on the sideline saying, I don't think I like this, which is the suburban women and minorities, right? So
you're saying those were the people that at the time were
opposition of firearms.
Okay.
Right. So they were more prevalent to say, I don't like this. Okay. I don't want a firearm here or there.
Just clarifying.
Right. So then move forward into those times. And we had in 2018, 6 million new gun owners. And this isn't like guys like myself that may have purchased another firearm. These are, I've never owned one. I'm just going to buy my first one.
What's an average? I mean, how does that compare to other times? Like,
it was grossly,
put you on the spot,
much larger.
5-10 times as much.
Okay. Big time. I mean, and we saw an ammunition shortage because of it. I mean, there was all kinds of different issues.
Gotcha.
But the significant portion, and again, these are all statistics that you can find online. The significant portion were minorities and so it was women,
suburban female,
suburban women, persons of color. It was a
that were purchasing firearms for the first time.
Yep. Okay. Because they realized, hey, look, the cops aren't going to be there to protect me. They can't protect me. They're unwilling to protect me. My municipality is unwilling to allow them to protect me. And they saw these takeovers, and the suburban women were seeing the instances of this, what was a metro urban issue, now coming out to their home. Right?
Gotcha.
And then they started saying, oh, well, now this is at my house or in my backyard, and I have to be able to defend myself. Gotcha. I have to be able to defend my children. And that's where it grew. And I think that, with that trend added on with the Bruin decision and, in the Supreme Court, and now we've, just saw the win for the Maryland, and where their portions of their law were struck down. New York's, but the Bruin 2, as they call it, it's, we're very excited about that. And I think that just because of the way that the Bruin 1 came out,
and again, that was the New York case.
That was the New York case, yeah. Right? That, is going to lead to a lot of folks being able to be more comfortable having a firearm. And look, until we get this mental health crisis that this country is going through under control, and admit that it's there and admit that that's the problem.
Yeah.
I think that more and more law-abiding individuals are going to seek to protect their family.
And if I can put a little capper on it real quick, I put a lot of responsibility on the media. In the 70s, I was young then, but in the 70s, there were instances of streakers running across football fields and baseball fields and stuff, and people running across for whatever reason to advertise, and they would show it on TV, and the problem got worse and worse and worse. Then they stopped showing it on TV. They made a decision, we as a network are no longer going to show these people, and it goes away. I personally believe that, and I'll throw my own thought in there, I personally believe that some of these people want to go out, I hate to use this expression, I don't mean it as a pun, but want to go out with a bang. They want to be, and you even see it in some of the handwritten mantras of, I'm going to be the best known serial killer. I want us to stop saying their name. Mm-hmm. I want the news to say, this happened, fine, it's news, you need to cover it. And then I want it to go away. And I think that if we don't glorify these people in the news by having 4, 5, 6 solid days of coverage of the trauma they created, and even though those people may be imprisoned, may be given the death penalty, depending on the state where they're charged, the next person who's borderline is saying, how can I be different? How can I stand out in the world? And if they're borderline with their mental health already, they see that as I'm going out with glory. And I think the same way we stopped showing and talking about people that streaked across the field, and it's a crude comparison because there's nowhere near the damage done, but the idea is the same. When you glorify this by giving it so much attention, whether or not you mean to, and of course it's if it bleeds, it leads. It's all about money.
Yeah, and I think that actually there's a little bit deeper, reasoning for them to do it. I believe that a lot of the folks in the media, just because of the interactions that I've had with a lot of folks in the media, they're pushing it because the more they show it, the more it upsets the people. The more it upsets the people, the more.
So a political motivation.
Yeah, they may be
to steer the society away from firearms.
100%.
Okay.
Yep.
That's an interesting. I never thought of it that way. I thought of it just as ratings and commercial money and all that, but I never thought if you have a political agenda in the news I guess that's naive of me not to think of that, but yeah, there's a lot of political agenda out there for sure.
There is.
Well, Art, thank you so much. This was a lot longer than I was hoping to keep you, and I appreciate it.
Well, maybe you can get 2 out of it.
Yeah, that's right. Maybe we'll divide it into part 1 and part 2. Thank you everybody for joining us on the first Curious Minds podcast, or maybe the first 2, depending on if I divide it up. And we hope to see you come back again. Art, thank you for taking the time to sit in with us, and maybe we'll have you back. If you have any questions, please leave them in our comment section, and we will I'll either follow up with Art directly, or maybe we'll do a round 2 in a couple months and have him back. So, Art, thanks again. I appreciate it very much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right, and we'll see y'all later. Thank you.